So Grant Cardone is a very successful author and speaker, real estate investor, and maybe you know him from social media. He's a huge personality. But there seems to be a common question, which is, can you trust him? Can you trust his business advice? Can you trust his investing advice? Can you trust the things that he talks about for his story and background and his success? And so in this video, I want to actually go through a small piece of this question. It actually comes from a recent Instagram post of his that I saw and said, wait a second, this is not a true statement. So hang tight, let's take a look at this post and talk about this question together. All right, welcome back. This is my channel, Joshua Talks Money. I talk about money, personal finance, and I share stories and the lessons that I've learned, the ones I'm still learning about money with you every week. If that sounds interesting to you, I'd love you to consider subscribing. Join us here. It should be a lot of fun. All right, first let me say that I am actually a big Grant Cardone fan. I own his books. I have listened to him for many years, and I use him as a source of inspiration. And actually, when I drive to Miami from time to time, I'll go drive by Cardone Capital's HQ, and I see the luxury vehicles, and I know that inside people are working really hard. They're closing deals. There's a lot of energy taking place. But the thing you really have to know about Grant Cardone is he is an elite salesperson. This is no mystery. He has books about selling. He has selling courses to train your sales teams on how to be better, how to close deals, how to overcome objections. And that is just in his nature. And in fact, his story is he started and he worked at a car dealership selling hundreds of vehicles. And he scaled this up and he grew and he learned how to really become good at closing deals. And so now that he's much bigger, he's a global celebrity, he has a much larger audience, the content that he puts out, the podcasts and videos and Instagram stories, you have to think of these through the lens of a sales funnel. There is something self-serving at the end of most of the messages that he is putting out into the world, which is totally fine. It makes a lot of sense. But you have to understand that that idea is what skews the advice that he gives, the content he posts, and the things he recommends to you. And right now, since he is such a big real estate investor, this is the main part of his message. He is constantly fundraising. He is constantly reaching out not only to accredited investors, but the average person asking for, hey, I'm about to get this huge deal, 100 apartment unit complex, and you can get in on it if you text me right now. You'll see this on the stories, sometimes a little bit creepy. Yo, text me if you got 200 grand. Send $1,000, send $200,000. Do you have $1 million? Send it to me. And he's accumulating all of this capital. The reason he's putting out a lot of this content around real estate is to simply fundraise for real estate deals. Okay, does that make sense? And I have to say that Grant Cardone is masterful at this. He is tough and direct, and he can push a deal forward in his communication, but he's also charming, and he also knows when to back down a little bit. And you see that in some of the sales coaching and videos. So it's easy to really buy into the message that he shares. And this video is not to dissect if these are good investments or if that is a good opportunity for you or not. There's videos that do that. This is mostly to help and encourage you on how to think when you hear these messages, when you are reading this content. Just put it through that framework of, hey, what is the driver or motivation for why Grant's telling me to do this? Okay, so I want to give a practical example of this and how I approach a recent post of his about the stock market. But before I do that, let me know in the comments, are you a Grant Cardone fan? Do you love the guy? Do you hate the guy? Let me know. I'm just curious to see how this mix shakes out. Okay, so here is the post that he shared on Instagram recently. And what it basically does is it compares stocks in the stock market to real estate in terms of investing. Now, if you don't read the text at all, if you just skim down your feed and see this visual, you're going to see Grant smiling. You're going to see real estate stock market chart, red and green, right? You're going to see real estate good, bunch of check marks, stock market bad, bunch of red X's. So without even reading the details, that visual is indicating, hey, this is probably not good. This is good. Right? So that's the first thing. But when you actually read what he wrote, that's where he's wrong. He's actually misleading you on the details of this comparison. All right, so let's just kind of go through them down the list. The first is zero tax benefits. When I read this, I just thought this is silly. I'm actually not a fan of matter-of-fact language. When anyone says, hey, you can never do that, no one does this, you will always do X, I get a little curious and maybe skeptical, because it's just really hard to say about a lot of things in this world. But in this case, zero tax benefits, it's just simply not true. There's a lot of tax benefits for investing in stocks. We've talked about them on this channel. Things like a Roth IRA, or even your 401k, where you have tax-deferred investing. I've done a video about SEP IRAs, how to reduce your income as a business owner by investing into a SEP IRA. And there's other things. Let's say your stocks go down, you can do something called tax loss harvesting, where you can basically write off some of the losses you incur on a trade that goes bad, for example. To say there's less tax benefits than real estate, maybe you could have that discussion, but to have it so binary it's just simply a false thing to say. All right, next up is negative impact on inflation. So as inflation has went through the roof, housing prices have went up, rent prices have went up, and that is indeed true. But to say that stocks are all negative because of inflation, that's not true. There's a list of different commodities and things that you could look at that in a high inflationary environment do really well. And so I just think, and again, it goes back to, is this true across the board? No. Okay, next up is high volatility. And then he talks about quarterly dividends versus like monthly cash flow, right? And what's really interesting is that there's actually, especially when you start to think about exchange traded funds, you can get really creative with all the funds out there that accomplish different things. And so there's actually something called SPHD. This is the Invesco S&P 500 High Dividend Low Volatility ETF, which is basically a fund tailored to combat exactly what he's saying here. This would give you regular dividends. I think right now the yield is like 3.8%. And then it will also help with volatility. And the SPHD ETF actually is up about 7 percentage points this year to date, where the S&P 500 index is down over 12%. And so it's just the mix of those companies that help ride through waves of volatility. And so to completely say that stocks are way too volatile, that they don't give you enough recurring cash flow or regular payouts, that's not true either. You can find things to accomplish those goals very easily. All right, next up, he talks about high risk margins. Look, I don't think trading on margin, investing with margin is a wise thing to do for the average person. There's a lot of risk there. But I also think that if you look back to 2008 and the housing market crash, there was high leverage in real estate. People who were in loans that they simply could not afford. And we saw the result of that. And also that people that have a lot of debt and they've accumulated a ton of real estate in their portfolio, they can be over leveraged, especially if those properties decrease in value. And so I think the risks of being over leveraged, regardless of where you're investing, is never good. I don't think it's unique to stocks. All right, and the last would be control. So this is interesting. I'm curious, if you did invest in one of Grant Cardone's real estate deals, how much control do you actually have of your capital? Could you pull that out at any time? I remember back in 2020, right when that COVID crash was happening, Grant got on Instagram and looked very panicked. I've never seen him like this before, and was basically saying, don't pull your money out, don't pull your money out, which ultimately was great advice, because if you didn't, theoretically, then you got to ride the wave of real estate just skyrocketing over the last 2 years. But it made me curious to know, what is your control over those funds? And not just unique to Grant, but in the housing market. If you have your money tied up in a large real estate investment, how liquid is that? Think about that in comparison to stocks, even in comparison to a real estate ETF, where you're investing in real estate physically, but through a fund. The difference is you have liquidity. You can go on right now and you can pull your money out. There is a buyer for what you're selling with those stocks, as opposed to the long drawn out process when you need to sell a piece of real estate. And so I think there's a lot more control and liquidity if you're investing in stocks, ETFs, other things like that. than comparing that with a gigantic 1,000-unit apartment complex. I mean, this is just an obvious thing to think about. My preference would be a post like this is a little bit more nuanced, and it is not so binary and black and white, because these topics aren't. And so in conclusion, can you trust Grant Cardone? Well, I personally think yes. I think there's a lot of things that he says you should listen to, and he gives great advice for free often. But I do think that you should take it through that lens of, hey, what's the outcome? Is there a motivation behind this advice? What other research do I need to do to make sure I have the full picture of this situation? And that's not just unique to him, that's unique to life itself. You should do your own research. That's why I started this channel, because I went down the path with a financial advisor. It did not work out well. I was uneducated, and I said, I'm not doing that ever again. I'm going to start to learn about money, and then I'm going to teach people what I've learned so they don't make the same mistakes that I did. I hope this video does that, and I hope it helps you. If you want to hear more videos about Grant or other financial personalities like him, let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to share my thoughts. And as always, I'll be back here soon with another video. I'd love to see you then. Thank you. Have a good one. Bye.